Good afternoon, everybody. My name starts with Z, Zellweger, so I've always been the last at school when presentations were made, and therefore today is the same, but by choice. I'm originally from Switzerland, but have lived in Asia most of my adult life. Right now, I'm running a small NGO out of Hong Kong, but mostly for North Korea, focusing on children in institutions and people with disabilities. And then I'm also a visiting fellow at Stanford. In addition, I do some consultancy work, link up people with an interest in North Korea with North Korean counterparts. So that's my so-called retired life. I'm going to talk about the present situation in North Korea regarding humanitarian aid. I will speak about has aid made a difference, the impact of the sanctions, and lastly, what kind of changes have I seen, having been involved in North Korea since 1995, and I also used to live there for 5 years when I was representing the Swiss government. International emergency relief to North Korea started in 1995, 22 years ago, at the time when the country faced a terrible famine, a period which is known in North Korean terms the arduous march. Today, the overall situation has modestly improved, and bulk deliveries of food and fertilizers are no longer made, I would say even no longer necessary. Therefore, aid programs can now focus on issues related to sustainability, knowledge transfer, and replication. The aim of aid programs is to improve the well-being of the North Korean people by paying particular attention to the country's most vulnerable. What are the issues? Chronic food insecurity, but it is no longer a famine. Also, pockets of poverty do exist. Chronic food insecurity is a major concern to the DPRK, driven by a lack of sufficient diverse food, inadequate healthcare, and poor access to water and sanitation. In addition, frequent natural disasters like floods and droughts add to people's vulnerability. External assistance plays an important role in safeguarding the lives of millions of individuals in North Korea. Expectations on aid agencies are high, as is the challenge because of the uncertainty regarding financial resources available to work in the DPRK. And Nadia pointed this out. I made a comparison, or I juggled some figures. For example, in 2016, we had a similar program like the 2017 Needs and Priorities Plan, and the funding level was at 26% only. That means, in other words, $44 million were received to assist 13 million people, vulnerable people, and that means US $3.38 per person. You don't get very far with that, I can tell you. So, during my recent visit to North Korea in April, I learned that some agencies might have to downsize further or even to withdraw because of the sharp decline in donations. But I would like to speak now about has aid or is aid making a difference? With the famine that occurred in the 1990s, an international humanitarian aid program was put in place, also at first reluctantly, as the international community did not want to believe in the severity of the situation. I was there during the summer 1995. I've seen villages which were no longer existing. You saw a kimchi pot floating, that was all. So aid programs started, and it was a huge learning process. Aid agencies knew very little about North Korea, and the North Koreans understood very little about international aid and its planning and delivery system. Monitoring aid, or site visits, which is a term used by our North Korean partners, brought me in touch with families, doctors, hospital patients, farmers, teachers, children, and so on. In the beginning, people were reluctant to meet strangers. Even eye contact was avoided. I usually felt like thin air. I didn't exist. Nobody will look at me. Very strange. But by now, people are much less fearful when dealing with foreigners, have become more curious about our way of life, and some even dream of traveling abroad. The living standards for ordinary people have improved in part as a result of the humanitarian assistance. A water tap in a family house, access to services for special needs children, and better nutrition because of a greenhouse project are just some of the examples of positive impacts on the lives of ordinary North Koreans. Interactions are transforming relationships. Opinions of foreigners are changing, and information from abroad is impacting views and attitudes. During the famine years, aid saved lives, many lives. And this was not only due to aid interventions, but also, even more so, because of the strong will and resourcefulness of the local people. A certain empowerment to make decisions, be it in terms of participating in market activities or entrepreneurship, experimenting with authorized changes in the farming policy, or in a variety of other manners. Over the years, the working relationships with officials at different levels have improved. And with that, a certain amount of trust and openness. Today, problems and issues can be addressed more directly, and access for planning and monitoring visits is less difficult. And moreover, DPRK officials are also much more receptive to new ideas. Technical support is not only appreciated by the North Korean partners, but also is necessary in many cases to ensure that the material provided are used correctly and effectively, without which the desired results could not be achieved. So it goes both ways, or hand in hand. In fact, at a recent meeting of representatives from a wide variety of non-governmental organizations aiding North Korea, we talked about the working conditions, and the vast majority agreed that the working environment for NGOs in the DPRK has improved in recent years. But now we come to another chapter, and that is the sanctions. The aim of the various sanctions is to pressure the Kim Jong-un regime to change its behavior by squeezing North Korea economically. UN and unilateral sanctions imposed on the DPR exclude humanitarian assistance and should not influence aid projects, in theory at least. From my recent visits to North Korea, I go about 3-4 times a year. I don't see sanctions having a direct impact in humanitarian terms on the general population, but I have to add yet. Because the longer the sanctions persist, the more likely they will impact the lives of ordinary North Korean people, increasing their hardships and hampering development. However, the most vulnerable, people with disabilities, the sick, the elderly, women and children, have already felt an impact. The level of humanitarian assistance is decreasing year by year, not only because of funding problems, but also because nowadays there is a more complicated and lengthy process in terms of procurement and also a much slower delivery. It's sometimes very hard to find a company that transports goods to North Korea. Another impact of the sanctions, there are now also rumors about new fees and charges that might be imposed for all sorts of services, and this will hurt everybody. It is a downward chain to the poor. Or another example, I'm told some factories in North Korea are having difficulties in purchasing raw materials, with the result that there will be under or unemployment. And more people will have troubles making ends meet. More people will fall through an already weak social safety net. In April, Chinese traders were still very active in the country. It remains to be seen what impact the restrictions on North Korea's coal exports to China will be. Is punishment the sole goal of Beijing's coal ban? Some experts I have spoken to felt that if enforced, the ban would indeed squeeze the regime's revenues, but it should also be seen as a gesture by Beijing to the new US administration. But a few words now to the day operations of aid agencies and how we feel the sanctions. It starts that donors go North Korea, no donations. So we have a hard time getting money for our projects. Then banking channels no longer exist. And it is almost impossible to transfer money for daily operational costs to North Korea or to pay Chinese suppliers. And this despite the provision for dispensation for humanitarian activities. Cash operations are undesirable and risky. Delays in procurement are common due to additional requirements for licensing and the needs to ensure that the equipment or the supplies are not on any sanction list. And finally, North Korean companies that used to operate according to international standards have been pushed into the gray zone because of the sanctions. The biggest impact, however, is the fact that because of the political situation, there is no official development cooperation with North Korea. By linking relief, rehabilitation, and gradually also development assistance, a stronger impact for enhancing the welfare of the general public can be achieved. And some DPRK aid programs are already what I would call hybrids, integrating both development and humanitarian considerations, a commendable effort with the rationale that prevention is better than a cure. Besides, it is now widely accepted that compartmentalization between humanitarian aid, which should be short-term, and development cooperation, which is long-term, is artificial as far as the poor people are concerned. Now, has North Korea changed in the past 20 years is a question I'm often asked. The answer is both yes and no, but it is certainly no longer the country I experienced in 1995. And some years ago, I created the term the 5 M's. And these M's are still quite valid today. They include the fact that markets and money are playing a much bigger role in the daily lives of ordinary people. Mobile phones have become a common form of communication. Motor cars have increased. And lastly, in Pyongyang, there is a developing middle class. What do I mean by middle class? Youngsters show off their latest mobile phones. People take taxis to work or go out in the evenings. Couples are eating in expensive restaurants where food bills are paid with stacks of euros or US dollars. Girls wear a little bit of jewelry, and men smoke expensive imported cigarettes, just to name a few very visible signs. But today, I would add another M, and that M is for mindsets. Citizen mindsets are changing too, particularly among the younger generation in Pyongyang. These are young adults who grew up in a time when the regime stopped providing everything, food, clothing, and many daily necessities. Therefore, they are not used to receive government handouts, but finding their own way to make ends meet. They have, therefore, a much more entrepreneurial spirit, and that's, for me, a mindset change. In closing, North Korea is still a poor nation, and aid programs will continue to be needed if we aim at improving the well-being of the country's people. Pressure and sanctions will not solve the problems on the Korean peninsula. In fact, historically, sanctions frequently increase the resolve of the country being targeted, both at government level or among ordinary citizens. I am convinced that only engagement offers a chance to address issues in a constructive and peaceful way. It will, however, be a path where pragmatism, patience, and perseverance is needed. Thank you.